Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple. And tonight I am very happy to welcome Jesse Katz for the release of his book, The Rent Collectors, Exploitation, Murder, and Redemption in Immigrant L.A. Let's give a hand for Jesse. Jesse is joined tonight in conversation by Michael Montgomery. Let's give a hand for Michael as well. Thank you all for being here on a Friday night in the middle of July. You could really be anywhere, and we're so glad to have you here in our store celebrating this really important, deeply researched, and very carefully handled, I think, book. I'm excited for you to hear more about it from the man himself. Thank you for joining us here in person and online. Hello, online audience. I'm pointing to a camera if you can't see. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We open each of our events with a land acknowledgement. We are operating on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we think that acknowledgement in doing so requires action, and so we encourage you to donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. We have details about how to contribute to or connect with the Ramaytush Ohlone Land Trust at the back desk there. And you can learn more about how to participate in this project of rematriation back there. We have some details. This event tonight, I'm happy to say, is presented in partnership with Alta Journal. Alta Journal is a quarterly publication for anyone seeking an insider's take on California and the West. They make a really beautiful magazine. It is a large format issue. As they say, the West demands a wide lens. It demystifies the region with provocative essays, cultural commentary, deeply reported investigations, original fiction and poetry, sumptuous photos, topical cartoons, and much more. It's a really great journal, I promise you. And Jesse is a contributor to Alta Journal, which is why they came aboard for this event. It was founded in 2017 and provides an exciting and much-needed literary perspective on the West, sparking conversations that are as diverse and vibrant as the place itself. They write really good copy. I think that sold me on Alta Journal. I have very brief business before we get to the rest of our night here. Now's a good time to silence your phones if you have not already. I think, is picture taking okay? Fine. Picture taking is fine, even encouraged. But yeah, don't take a call in the middle of the event. That would not be cool. Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are currently attending. The restroom is behind me. It is available after the event, not during the event, for obvious reasons. If you need to know how to get there, do ask me, and I will gladly help you. We have copies of Jesse's book. Actually, both books, The Opposite Field is there as well at the front register. You can find them there. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two folks who are joining us this evening. First, Michael Montgomery is an award-winning investigative journalist and senior producer with Reveal. He has reported extensively on mass incarceration and is a consulting producer for the new documentary film, The Strike, about the largest prison hunger strike in U.S. history. Let's give it one more hand for Michael Montgomery. And last but most certainly not least, Jesse Katz is a former Los Angeles Times and Los Angeles Magazine writer whose honors include the James Beard Foundation's MFK Fisher Distinguished Writing Award, Penn Center USA's Literary Journalism Award, National Magazine Award nomination, and 2 shared Pulitzer Prizes. His writing has appeared in the anthologies Best American Magazine Writing, Best American Crime Writing, Best American Sports Writing. As a volunteer with Inside Out Writers, he has mentored incarcerated teenagers at Central Juvenile Hall and the former California Youth Authority. He is the author of The Opposite Field, and his latest book, The Rent Collectors, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for Jesse Katz.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for Green Apple, Alta Magazine. It's great to see you, Jesse. just one bit of detail. We've known each other a very long time. We went to high school together in Portland, Oregon.
Mike's promised not to use any of that information against me.
And I have followed Jesse's career as a writer for all these years in utter amazement. And this book is really, it's just a remarkable book. We're going to kind of slowly unravel the plot as we get through this conversation. But I do just want to say it's about street gangs in Los Angeles. It's about a young man who, for a lot of reasons, aspires to be part of that gang and ends up doing something terrible, which is being involved in a botch hit that leads to the death of a young baby. It's about migrants and migrant communities in Los Angeles and black market workers who are exploited by the gangs and targeted by the city and city authorities. So it's got many levels. And like I said, it's been really interesting for me to see this book evolve, because it's been quite a few years that you've been working on it.
You've suffered through some dramatic readings when it was an unfinished product.
No, and I do want to say it's also gotten some fantastic reviews. The LA Times, New York Times said, for a tough guy book about tough guys, this is a work of almost unerring tenderness. Its subtitle promises redemption. The book itself delivers something more honest. Stories about people broken by powers larger than they are, and who nonetheless find the will to fight.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to start with reading a passage from the book.
I will. Yeah, thank you, Michael. And again, thank you, Green Apple. Brick and mortar bookstores are fragile institutions. Thank you, Alta Journal. Print magazines are fragile institutions. We're all suffering through fragility here. But here we are, and it's beautiful to see some familiar faces and meet some new people. So I don't think this requires much explanation. This is the very beginning of the book, and if this doesn't grab you, then the whole thing is doomed. When at last he opened his eyes, it was because he was falling. That meant he wasn't dead, not yet. The earth below Giovanni was like cinder, slick from an overnight mist and steep as a windswept dune. With each flinch of his body, the slope loosed beneath him, a hiss of shale, a rush of gravel, propelling him downward. A ribbon of lavender broke the darkness, revealing the day's first glimpse of La Rumorosa, the coil of borderland highway that writhes around the Sierra de Juarez, halfway between Tijuana and Mexicali. The gusts that moan through the rusted canyons and granite crags have given La Rumorosa its name, the Whispering Woman. In the span of 14 miles, Carretera 2D twists more than 70 times, corkscrewing as it plunges 4,000 feet from shrouded mountaintop to swirling sands. La Rumorosa is a gash in the Baja Desert, a white-knuckle trek and a dumping ground. Mythologized in ghost stories and second-guessed by safety engineers, the passage stirs primordial awe, a forgotten planet, the Mexican poet Adolfo Sagastume calls La Rumorosa, a silent uterus. A city boy, Los Angeles born, Giovanni had never heard of the place. Now it was swallowing him. Flailing his arms, pawing at dust, Giovanni felt the scrape of chaparral. He wrapped a hand around a gnarled root. It broke his slide. For a moment he was suspended, the cliff still once more. Blinking away the fog, Giovanni tried to make out the road above him, too high to see. Below, the gorge looked bottomless. He realized then that his shoes were gone, the black suede Jordans he bought with a check from his first honest job. Only socks covered his feet. He stared at his shirt, a white tee with the curly Sean John logo, now stained with vomit. Blood, too, had soiled the cotton. His neck throbbed, so much he could barely turn his head. The skin burned. He thought maybe he'd been shot, until he touched a finger to his throat. A collar of torn flesh, pulpy and raw, branded his windpipe. That was where the rope had seared him, where his killers, before tossing him over the edge, had cinched it tight, yanking like some soul-snatching repo men. Now he remembered.
Wow. And
I kind of think of that scene as like, you've seen one of the Hangover movies, not to trivialize what I just wrote and read, but they're like waking up in Las Vegas and trying to figure out, oh my God, what happened the night before, and piece it all together. Here's a kid who had just turned 18, trying to piece together his life at that moment.
And what is really great about your plot structure is you open with that scene, and then we slowly go back, and you eventually wind your way back to that moment. So we get that scene twice, or that sequence twice, but from slightly different perspectives and different contexts.
There's some writerly term for this, the structure. I think it's called a 9 structure. Not to get too deep in the weeds, but you start with that. You don't start at the beginning, right? But you don't want to go too far, but you pick the most dramatic moment. You kind of up the stakes and engage the reader, but you don't resolve it, right? You're writing, you're asking questions, you're posing possibilities or uncertainty, and then you can go back to the beginning. And I think we connect with this moment like 150 pages into the book.
Right, and it allows you to go forward and backwards in time because you're starting at not the beginning and not the end. So I think that's really effective. I want to get into Giovanni because he's your main protagonist. He's a very interesting character that you don't often see treated in this way. But I do want to ask you just how the book came about. You went to Los Angeles to become a writer. You worked for the Los Angeles Times. You covered gangs and crime and crooked cops. But that isn't really, so it gave you this base of knowledge, but that wasn't really a spark for the book. Talk to me about, when the book really started, visualizing in your mind.
Well, it was maybe the foundation for the book, but if I can just go even one step further back in time, I grew up in Portland, Oregon, as did several of the people in this room, in a really safe, clean, sheltered environment. It was a world that didn't really prepare me for Los Angeles. Whatever you think of Los Angeles, I didn't know what to think. And when I got there, I was sort of thrown into truly the most diverse, complicated, energizing, bewildering environment I'd ever been in. And I guess I had the good fortune of starting my LA life as a cub reporter at the LA Times. And so I had license or an opportunity or a responsibility to go out and go explore the city and go all those places that, you're quote unquote not supposed to go.
And a city awash in scandal. I mean, Ramparts police, Rodney King that was 10 years earlier, or almost. You had the crack epidemic, the emergence of the gangs, you had the get tough moment of, blocking mass incarceration. There was a lot going on in LA at that time.
There was a lot going on. And it was also a time of historically high crime and gang culture was just exploding. And again, I guess at a certain point I wanted to prove that I wasn't as ill-equipped to handle that as maybe I thought I'd been. I was fascinated with it, and I was a storyteller, and it looked like a good story, and I just kind of wanted to prove that I wasn't squeamish, that I could go speak to anybody, and I began little by little to sort of realize, and you know this, Mike, from your own reporting, that, that when you approach people proper, and you do it respectfully, and you do it with empathy, and you kind of shine a light on who they are, and they suddenly are feeling more seen and heard and realizing that you're not just there to extract a story, that suddenly whatever chasm separates us begins to close somewhat. So I was having those experiences in LA in the 1980s, 1990s, but the real genesis for the book takes place probably in 2011. My son, who is 31 now, was on his way to college. And I had been a single dad, attended with one of our guests here tonight in New Orleans. And I was really proud of him and excited for him, but I was very nervous for myself. I was really, I was experiencing real anxiety about the barrenness of my house. And so I moved from Monterey Park at that time to MacArthur Park. And MacArthur Park's really the belly of the beast of LA. This is whatever stereotypes there are people have of LA, even people who live in LA have never set foot in MacArthur Park. It's one of those communities that, at worst is demonized, and at best is overlooked, and somewhere in the middle it's just kind of misperceived. It's the center of Central American immigrant life in LA. It's the center of the fake ID trade. It's the center of street vending. It's a place of it's one of the densest communities on the West Coast. You don't think of LA of people living crammed into century-old tenements, living head to toe, 10 people on mattresses across the floor. It's really, it can be a very desperate and precarious place. And found an apartment there that the idea was, this is going to distract me. I'm just going to, kind of hit reset and really feel the stimulation of the city. And as it turned out, I was looking out at turf that was Giovanni's, turf that Giovanni's gang claimed. And about 6 feet from my front door was where this terrible crime took place. It had already occurred, but when I moved in, the trials were unfolding. And so kind of the narrative of this event was popping up in the LA Times. I was reading about this.
And this was anyone who lived in LA back then, you knew about this case. It was notorious, a 3-week-old baby being killed in, gunfire, by these gangs. It just got a lot of attention, and there was a lot of pressure to solve the case, and in the end, put away a lot of guys, sent a lot of guys to prison. You, so you were kind of thinking about this place, and then you were aware of this case, and you were aware of Giovanni. But why did Giovanni? He was like a kid. Not immediately like, oh my God, this is an amazing character. There's a lot of things you wouldn't have known at that. So why focus on him?
So I was exploring that ecosystem, and we should clarify that the shooting was intended to target a street vendor who was not paying his rent to the gang. And so the fact that it was a crime designed to enforce an economic scheme, and a scheme that was also facilitated by the city of LA's criminalization of street vending, that appealed to me as a storyteller, more so than if it had just been a gang shooting, like our neighborhood against your neighborhood. I didn't know that was going to lead to anything all that productive. I guess I had the idea, and I've often had this idea approaching stories, that, is there a chance that the person who's committed this ugly, ugly crime might not be an ugly person? He could be. There was a decent chance, and if he was, and those people exist, then, I don't know, it probably wouldn't have been a book, right? There wouldn't have been all that much.
Well, there wouldn't have been a redemption journey, I don't think, right?
But, what if he's not ugly? What if when you get to know him, you have a name, you have a face, you have a backstory, you begin to consider, all the larger forces and policies and systemic failures and family breakdowns and inherited trauma and all this stuff that got layered onto this kid, and you can maybe begin to feel some empathy for him, even as you're feeling empathy for his victims. So, the book is true crime, and I guess we that's a shorthand, right? In the sense that it is true, it's all nonfiction, and there is a terrible crime at the center of it. But it's really about those institutions and those systems and this kid who's like a cog in all of that, right? And I think the effect of that is, what I hope the effect is that instead of going, oh my God, how could something like this happen? You begin to peel back the layers and you understand, like, oh yeah, this is exactly how something like this takes place.
I think it's testament to your reporting, though. Like, we even heard it in this excerpt. Just the details you capture of this sort of cinematic details of what we're seeing is so, and it goes for his life, his growing up. There's just so many reporting details that build him into a three-dimensional character. I want to ask, by the time you get rolling on this, he's serving a 51-year prison term. So he's in prison, out in the what, Imperial Valley, right? Or no, he's not in Imperial Valley at that point.
No, actually, he was at
He
that
was.
at the very beginning. We should add that. So Giovanni is targeting a street vendor. The vendor is shot, but the vendor fortunately survives. Inadvertently, one of these bullets strikes a newborn infant who's swaddled in a stroller next to the vendor. And the reason that baby is out there is because the baby's mom is a vendor, and she doesn't have health care or child care or really much of a safety net. So, any one of us who have had a child before, you probably would have the resources to avoid placing your infant in that kind of like tumultuous situation. She didn't. She needed to make money. And so Giovanni never saw the baby. Obviously, what he did was terrible. It was reckless. But that part of it was inadvertent. And but in the gang world, as terrible as we would think killing a baby is, it's a special kind of atrocity in the gang world, especially in the prison gang, higher mafioso echelon. And so the consequence is it would be open season on Giovanni's gang unless the gang got rid of him. And Giovanni was so young and naive and needy and so desiring of like the gang's acceptance and love that first of all, he was willing to do this. But secondly, he didn't understand when the gang said, let's go down to Mexico. He thought they were going to hide him out, but they were really taking him there to kill him. The only way the gang could erase the shame and protect itself was to dispose of Giovanni. And so this idea of him like literally rising from the dead to haunt his old gang. He ends up eventually turning himself in, agreeing to testify in multiple trials at great risk to himself. The gang already wanted to kill him for violating the rules of that world. Now he's a rat or a snitch, and he's violating those rules all over again. And in exchange for his testimony, he got a 51-year sentence. So I catch him in year 11 of 51, and I just wrote him a letter. I didn't have any connection to him. I looked him up on the state of California inmate locator and got his CDCR number and an address for the prison, and I wrote a letter like, you don't know me and I don't know you. And I had a lot of trepidation because you know what prison can do to people. It could really break you or harden you or poison you in all sorts of ways. It can be a really toxic environment. But I told Giovanni, I said, I'm going to go out on a limb. You are 29 years old today, and I'm going to guess you're not the same person you were in 2007 when you pulled the trigger. And if you're not that same person and you want to talk about it and describe who that person was and how that person was created and what you're doing to no longer be that person, I'm all ears. And when I received his response, honestly, I was like in tears when I received Giovanni's letter because it was so open and so sincere. And he was really adamant that, if another young person, if their eyes could be opened to what he ultimately recognized, that the gang is a family, this idea, that there was love and acceptance, that it was all honor, that it was all a mirage, it was an illusion. And if that was the case, then his life was an open book. And that was 6 years ago. And honestly, he's never wavered from that. He has always, and that's where a lot of these details come from. Right. The specificity of the reporting and the writing is because he was so willing to share his story with me.
But you're meeting with him in these, the visiting room at this prison. So there's a lot of people around. There's guards around. It's not exactly the easiest place to conduct an interview. You're not able to record anything. How many visits did you have with him?
I've probably visited him 50 or 60 times. We do it like once a month for the last 6 years. I should add, there's no special accommodations for an author or a reporter. So I'm there on visiting day, just like any other person. And I'm kind of a weirdo, there, like everyone, it's a lot of dolled up women to see their man. And I'm like the white guy in REI hiking pants, and everyone's sort of wondering like what my deal is.
Are you allowed to take in a notebook?
No.
So you have to memorize this stuff. As I recall, you would get back to your car and then just spit it all out into a recorder, right?
Yeah. So there was actually like pre-interview prep where I had to sort of create buckets in my head and think through what were the areas we were going to cover today. Now when I go visit him, it's more just like catching up. We have a close relationship. A lot of our recent visits have been preparing him kind of psychologically for the publication of the book,
Yeah.
and just getting him ready for what this means, how exposed he is. But in the beginning, when it was really trying to piece this together, well, what t-shirt were you wearing? Your shoes, what kind of shoes were they? How did you pay for those shoes? All those little details. I would create these buckets and I would go in to see him. We usually sat for 3 or 4 hours, and we're feasting on like vending machine foods, all your ultra processed fats and sugars. And yeah, it's hard. There's a lot of noise and hubbub around us, and there's guards watching every move, and yeah, I can't write down a single thing he's saying. And I would try to close my eyes and sort of visualize those lines, and I would get back to the car and I would just scribble, and then I would start driving and I would turn on the tape recorder and make voice notes to myself. And then to kind of back that up, I would write a letter to Giovanni. I would say, hey, it was really great seeing you. When you said, X, Y, or Z, that really spoke to me or touched my heart. And that would give him a chance to say, well, actually, that's not what I said, or he could then elaborate on that. And then we had this sort of record of our conversations.
So there's a moment in the book where Giovanni has just carried out this crime. He doesn't know yet that this baby's been killed. And I want you to read a passage from the book where you kind of try to help us understand what he thinks this act has done for him, carrying out the gang's wishes, proving himself. But it's really interesting, and you quote Father Greg Boyle, founder of Homeboy Industries, in this. But I think it's a really, when I read this passage, I'm like, oh my God, this really crystallizes like the attraction of the gang for him.
Yeah, no, I love that passage. Father Greg, hopefully you've heard of him. If you haven't, he's written several books. His first book, Tattoos on the Heart, is just an extraordinary testament to like the power of compassion. And boy, I steal a lot of his lines, and repurpose them. He talks a lot about surrendering the moral high ground. And I just like that, if it's so easy to sit in judgment of people rather than sort of thinking about the burdens they carry. Anyway, I've known Father Greg from the time I was a gang reporter in the early 90s, and I've watched him grow into this, best-selling author, and he just received the Presidential Medal of Honor, I think a month ago. There's Joe Biden putting the thing around his neck, and the medal around his neck, and he's just so respected and admired, and he's a treasure. Anyway, Giovanni's just pulled the trigger. When gangs commit violence, their actions mask a language, the vocabulary of the despondent. As Los Angeles priest Gregory Boyle, founder of the gang recovery program Homeboy Industries, likes to say, each bullet speaks not to conflict, but a lethal absence of hope. Gangs sniff out those vacant places. They fill the wounds. Under their spell, a damaged kid can believe the lie that killing is a kind of alchemy, pain transformed into approval. Giovanni hadn't wanted to, but he'd risen to the occasion. Because of him, the whole organization would have a smoother time collecting rent. The consequences of non-payment couldn't be starker, and here he was, living to tell about it. Nobody could talk shit about him now. In one cold-blooded flourish, he'd shown he was no snitch. He'd faced his fears and he'd conquered them. He could be counted on to do whatever, whenever. It was a feeling more intense than anything the square world, with its rote tasks and rigid schedules, could offer. I dirtied my hands for them, Giovanni says. That's supposed to bring you closer together, to make your bond even stronger.
It's like going into combat almost, you think about that. There's another dimension to the book. I'm just looking at the clock, and I want to make sure we get into this, which is the migrant community itself, the people who work, the vendors in MacArthur Park. And I want to read something you wrote about it, which I think captures some of the points you're trying to make. For the migrant, it constituted a cold bargain. Toil at the margins, stay out of trouble, swallow your humiliations, forego the ability to vote or serve on a jury or collect unemployment or ever feel secure in your skin. And if you're lucky, America might just leave you in limbo.
Yeah, I mean, MacArthur Park, and not just MacArthur Park, obviously there's parts of the Bay Area and other parts of America where you just have thousands and thousands, really millions and millions of people who are in limbo. And the rhetoric about immigrants right now is just so deeply offensive to me. I mean, I just feel that on a visceral level, it's just toxic and destructive when we start dividing, groups into us versus them. And it's also, it's just such a, political tool. And I don't even know if people really believe it or not. It's just, it's a device. But MacArthur Park is one of those places that is largely undocumented. And so you have people that are here to work, and yet they're barred from the formal workforce. And so what do you do? I mean, I actually think wherever you are on the political spectrum, it's not healthy to have millions of people who are just kind of stuck in the middle. I mean, I really hope we will never have deportation forces rounding people up. I think that is problematic in a million different ways. But I also think it's terrible that we don't have a bridge to legalization or to citizenship. People are just stuck. And so street vending is one way that folks in LA have figured out to improvise a future for themselves. And it's the barrier to entry is so low. Just take some ingenuity. You have a piece of pavement, and if you bring some product that you've bought in bulk and you now want to sell piecemeal, or you bring some tamales or tostadas that you're cooking at home and then you bring them out to sell there, you've turned that pavement into a job.
Barely scraping by. I mean, we won't get into it, but there's a girl who's a witness to everything that happens. She becomes a very important witness, and she's very much at risk. And she continues with her family to sell on the sidewalks of MacArthur Park among the gangs because they really have no choice. So there is a picture of despair, and yet at the same time, you show the strength that these people have. People in this community. And I think that's really important.
I mean, I think you have to have a lot of optimism if you're willing to go out on the street every day and sell a product, and knowing that is has been criminalized by your city, that the police could come by and ticket you and destroy your merchandise, and you end up with a fine or even be arrested, and suddenly you're sucked into the criminal justice system and all the collection process and
all the fines and the fees that really add up for people barely scraping by.
Yeah, not to mention the potential immigration consequences. And then on the other hand, you have a really nefarious hierarchical gang that sees the vulnerability there, and it's a way that's very symmetrical. They're looking at, well, the city's taking a cut of this action. We're going to take a cut of this action. And so to be a vendor and be willing to put yourself out there, not to mention just the risks of being in a cash economy and the weather and all the other things that can go wrong, you really have to believe, tomorrow's going to be better than yesterday. And so there's a vendor, Francisco Clemente, who's out there with... who would become his partner and wife, and he's a very proud, stubborn man, and he probably would do it differently if he had a chance to do this all over again. But I feel like what he did when he told the gang, "Screw you, these streets belong to everybody. This is for all of us," and I just think that was so damn courageous. And nobody's there backing him up. Nobody's got his back. Nobody's applauding him. He's just one guy trying to hold back this this criminal enterprise all by himself. And of course, the gang can't allow that to happen. And so, who do they choose? The gang chooses, the weakest, neediest, most malleable, kid in their crew.
Yeah, and another part of the book is the way in which we see this underworld criminal power structure, how large it actually is. It's not just about one street gang. It's about street gangs that are then connected to prison gangs, and the top bosses are in like solitary confinement. And that your main character, this guy Puppet, is in the highest security prison in America in Florence, Colorado, with terrorists and all sorts of people, and he's still calling the shots.
Yeah,
so it's kind of amazing.
We've been sort of talking about street level stuff, but the layers and the echelons of what it leads to is really extraordinary. So you have a gang that they are taxing, right, the most vulnerable people in the community, but the gang is also subject to taxation from a higher authority. And this is the prison gang, it's the Mexican mafia in this case, and the godfather of these streets in MacArthur Park is a guy known as Puppet, and he's at Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, with El Chapo and the Shoe Bomber, and just like a real rogues gallery of folks and he's in the most, he's in solitary confinement. He's in the most restrictive, dehumanizing environment that the federal government can devise. And yet Puppet has, I don't want to sing his praises, but he has like a dark imagination that can't be confined. And I feel like there's something about him being in this just bloodless, soulless world that has clarified his mind. He's only got one thing to focus on, and that's making sure that the gang is kicking up money to him.
So before we get to questions, I want to just kind of fast forward. So there are these federal trials. Most people plead out. As you mentioned, Giovanni cooperates. He doesn't really get much of a break. He gets 51 years. Some of the ringleaders get less time, like 20 years. So he ends up, there's all sorts of, strange things about the way those cases played out. He goes to prison. He starts having a kind of reawakening. He gets his GED, starts getting educated. And at the same time, there's a pushback on, mass incarceration, starts getting some momentum of legal changes. So all of a sudden, there starts maybe to see a little hope for him. So talk a little bit about how he's evolved and how his legal situation has evolved.
Yeah, I think that his awakening took place after the criminal justice reforms began to kick in. When he started his incarceration, he was pretty much, his attitude was kind of like, screw it. 51 years, it just seemed forever if you're 18 years old. And even with good conduct time, it would have been 40 some odd years. His mom wasn't even that old at the time. So it was this incomprehensible future. And about 10 years into his incarceration, it was kind of the beginning of the pendulum swinging towards a philosophy of second chances. Some of it was motivated by real brain science, that the young brain is not fully formed. I know my mom would always tell my son Max that, his brain's not formed at 19 or 20 or 21. And they think now it's 23 or even older. And so youthful offenders are considered or should be considered less culpable, and also more rehabilitatable, more susceptible to that. And in 2015, the California legislature passed a law that expanded parole eligibility for offenders under the age of 23. They'd already done under the age of 18, but Giovanni didn't qualify because he was 18. So at a decade into prison, suddenly Giovanni sees the possibility that he might actually get out. And his 51-year sentence, because it's a determinate sentence, it has an end point, he would become eligible for parole in his 15th year of incarceration. And so that really changed his outlook. He's suddenly thinking, my God, I might get out of here one day. And that's almost about the time when I parachute into his life. And we developed this really close relationship where he's not had a stable adult really ever in his life, definitely not a stable male figure. And I sort of, I want to say he became like a surrogate son to me, replacing my son who was off at college. But Giovanni needed me in ways that my son, took some of that stuff for granted. He had the advantage and the privilege of not needing my advice. Giovanni, he was listening to me.
Were there some boundaries you had to sort of pay attention to?
The one boundary that I maybe it was artificial, is I told him while I was reporting the book that I wasn't going to endorse his parole. I wasn't going to speak or write a letter, so I didn't want to skew that outcome. And I don't know, he accepted that, but it felt a little selfish in a way. I mean, I was playing by my rules, and this was his life at stake. But now that the book is done, I've told him that, I'm at your side. I mean, we're allies in this, and I will say or write whatever needs to be said to show the parole board that you're not currently dangerous.
And I gather he hasn't had a chance to read the book yet. They don't allow hardcover books in prison.
Another one of many pitfalls of being incarcerated is hardcover books are not allowed. I thought it was because you would club somebody over the head with the book, but they actually take the fiber that's in the hardcover and wet it and twist it and kind of into almost like a paper mache device. So you're creating a shank out of a book cover.
So they say.
Allegedly.
So
and should I say, and of course the paperback isn't, I have a paperback, but it's not commercially available, and I can't just put this in an envelope. Right. It has to come from a legitimate book vendor. And to add to the degree of difficulty, I've begun printing the book out as a Word document for him, but you can't put any more than 10 sheets of paper in an envelope when you mail it. So I've sent him like 30 envelopes already. I can only imagine how weird that is. He's getting like a serialized version of his life coming in the mail.
God, that's... there's a lot of things I want to ask about. There's this wild gang attorney who you write about his exploits. He eventually gets caught. But I think we want to get to some questions. So,
yeah.
Anyone have something you want to ask Jesse about this book? Or anything?
Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask about your influences. Are you interested in like crime and mystery books? And were you interested in L.A. crime and mystery writers like Raymond Chandler, for instance?
The question for anyone who's watching online is my influences and sort of the classics of L.A. crime and mystery. I've always been like a nonfiction person, and I need to expand my horizons, I would say. I love books that take like a single incident, a single crime, or a time period, and explore it deeply, and then find those larger meanings from it. One of my favorite books is by the New Yorker writer Susan Orlean. It's called The Library Book.
Orchid Thief.
Orchid Thief as well, which became a very interesting and bizarre movie too. But the Central Library in downtown LA in 1986 suffered this catastrophic fire. And I always feel like people even in LA don't remember it. It's the worst library fire ever. And she goes back and explores it and treats it like a police procedural or a fire procedural. And it's never quite been solved. There was a suspect, and she goes through all the mechanics of how a fire is investigated and how the books were freeze dried, and it was a huge civic effort. But then she also talks about the role of libraries in our lives, and it's somewhat of a memoir in her own life. And it's just it's like this one incident that has been somewhat forgotten, but shouldn't be, and she just like blows it up into a metaphor for our world. Those are the kinds of books that make me go, damn it, I should have thought of that myself.
That gets me, your first book was highly autobiographical. This second book, you're not in it at all. Was that an easy decision to make, or were there temptation to, because I can definitely see places where, your relationship with various people, how you get them to talk. I mean, a lot of different ways in which you could have put yourself in, but you didn't.
Some would say my first book was a little too autobiographical.
I didn't say that.
It was a very personal book, a memoir about my life in Monterey Park during a certain period. I think what I wanted to do here was to totally keep myself out of it, partly because I take a lot of pride in this book that it centers the voices and experiences of people who are often overlooked and who are there usually for window dressing, or they're there in some sort of stereotypical capacity. But a street vendor, like, his life really matters, and what he went through was hellacious, and he still has 2 of Giovanni's bullets embedded in his flesh and bone. That counts. And Giovanni, would be very easy to write off, and he basically had been. Nobody reached out to him. Nobody had ever tried to contact him and see about telling his story before I barged into his life. And it was just really important to me to show their life the way they understood it, the way they lived it. A very subtle thing, but I'm also really thankful to my publisher, Astra House, that they agreed to this. There's a fair amount of untranslated Spanish in the text. And first of all, there's no translation. It's not, no parentheticals after the words. And but the words are not in italics either. And so it's just this is how people talk. Let's not exoticize these words. It comes organically out of people's lives and their experiences. And also in the endnotes where I have the sourcing, anybody that I interviewed in Spanish exclusively, and of course their words have been largely translated in the text, I have their original Spanish in the back of the book. So you could see how they really talk, effort at transparency, and also just, I think, respect. And that's all. I wanted to be out of that. I just wanted to showcase who they are.
Any other questions?
Was it nerve-wracking looking into this dangerous group of people? Were you kind of scared they might come back to you, or was that not really?
Was it nerve-wracking? You can ask my wife that question. There's a few really scary dudes in all of this, but I would say that the events that I describe are all in the past, and so they were all adjudicated. The people that got arrested. People that were sentenced got sentenced. Some of those people are already out of prison. And so life has gone on, and I'm not really disrupting anybody's business affairs. I'm not poking my nose into something that's going to get anyone in any more trouble than they already are. And I feel, maybe I'm naive, I feel that gives me a little bit of protective cushion. And also, again, I try to approach people respectfully. There's one guy in this book, his name is Baby, and he was the gang member who thought of taxing the street vendors. It was his idea. And he ended up going to prison for 10 years, and I tracked him down, and I actually sent him a letter. This is a good bit of advice. If you're ever trying to reach somebody, write him a letter in an envelope with addressed by hand with a stamp on it. Nobody gets that kind of mail anymore. Mm-hmm. So I'm mailing letters, and people are calling me the minute they open the letter. Anyway, Baby calls me. He has received my letter, and he's like, well, what if I don't want to be in your book? Are you going to put me in your book anyway? I'm like, damn, this guy's smart. And I said, well, yeah, the truth is you testified in a public courtroom. Your name, your words are part of a public record. So I'm planning on using that. But I hope you will see that I'm coming to you kind of man to man, and I want to know who you are and see you as a three-dimensional person. So I'm not just conveying you as a defendant on a witness stand or a cooperating witness on a witness stand. You are you, and you have a backstory, and you have interesting motivation, and give me credit for that. And I think that approach worked a lot.
Did he talk?
He did. You know, we're great friends. We've gone out for beers and shot pool and
With baby?
yeah.
Oh my God, that's a little unnerving, actually, given what we read in the book about his exploits.
You know, people grow up.
Right.
You know, I mean, a lot of crime is committed by very young people whose brain hasn't been fully formed, and you know. I know some people in this room who did some really stupid shit with me when we were teenagers. Fortunately, it didn't involve guns. Might have involved some drug use, but you know, none of us went to prison. And you know, people grow out of it.
And we see that with characters in the book, obviously. Any other questions?
There's another hand.
Yes,
Maddie.
So, hearing about his long sentence, Giovanni's long sentence, compared to these, ringleaders, and hearing about your work and really humanizing his experience, I almost feel some regret, as if you were there earlier when he was negotiating it, you could have, maybe helped negotiate a better sentence through mitigation. And I'm also wondering about what kind of conversations you had with him about ethics of, you're writing this book and it's supporting your career, and it seems in turn you're telling his story. But I'm interested in that ethical conversation, but then also about, do you also feel any regret that I'm feeling? Yeah,
those are really good questions. Regret about not being there to be more of a positive influence, but also the fact that I'm leaving him very exposed, and what's in it for me and what's in it for him.
Right.
Well, the first part, you're a public defender, and you will be saddened to know that he turned himself into the police without a lawyer,
right,
and gave a full confession. So he didn't need me; he needed you there. And I was like, dude, don't you watch the movies? It's like, I need a lawyer. I can't talk.
And he also faced a very clever, smart police investigator who really just, it's a strong part of the book where you just, it's sad because you just see what's going on, and he's confessing without even thinking. Sorry, I just want to say, at the end of that meeting with the cop, this is in Utah where he had fled to, he's like, can I go home now? It's like, oh my God.
Because the homicide detective, who is really a great guy and a great character and a great human being, and he had convinced Giovanni, like, we're not really after you, we're after the big fish, these older guys who manipulated you, which happened to be true, and yet Giovanni thought, well, if I tell you what you want to hear, maybe then I'm exonerated.
Right.
But he ends up, he's confessing to a murder, and it's really tragic. And he doesn't quite. He's trying to outsmart a master interrogator. Second part of your question, so I would say that. What Giovanni's done is really courageous and reflects a lot of integrity on his part. I think he's done it willingly at every step along the way. I did some fact-checking with him where I took every quote and thought that was interior thought that was attributed to him, and I put that in a Word document and mailed it to him, so he knew exactly what he was going to be on the record kind of saying and thinking. I think from his perspective, this is a way for him to understand his life. I think he grew up in such a fractured, precarious home, and there were a lot of secrets, and there was a lot of domestic turmoil and abuse, and he didn't have the ability to even understand, like, his parents' journey. His mom escaped from civil war in El Salvador and was smuggled across the border in the trunk of a Coyote sedan, and the trauma of that he had never really thought through and internalized. His biological father died of AIDS when Giovanni was 1 year old, and he never learned that. In fact, he didn't learn it till his mom told me that I should tell him on Father's Day 2 years ago. She's like, Jesse, or she says, Mijo, Jesse has something to tell you. And I'm like, me? I do?
Wait, you're together
Yeah.
at the prison.
Yeah, she was finally, his mom had not visited him for 10 years when I first came into things. And it's kind of a tragic reason. She had something on her record that was very minor, but you have to disclose that if you want to get approved as a visitor. And I was able to help figure that out and get her approved, and then was with her on her first visit to see her son, which I think is one of the really tender parts of the book. But I would say that, like, so Giovanni's going to go to the parole board. He, I don't want to give too much away about the ending of the book, but he will appear next spring before the parole board. And part of what he has to do is tell his story. He needs to be able to say, this is who I was, and this is why I was that person. And now I don't want to be that person anymore. I'm not that person anymore. And these are the steps that I've taken. And I think our level of engagement with each other has given him some of those answers to his own life, which was just very murky to him before. And I also think, like, Giovanni has never said, leave this out of the story, or let's sugarcoat this, or you know, he's always chosen kind of radical truth over secrets. And I think he really believes, like, that's the only path to redemption for him. He has to be absolutely real with everything that's happened in his life, and that's part of his healing, and that's part of how he's going to become a better version of himself.
Well put. One more quick question. I guess I have. Okay, please.
What's one link in the chain of, like, social and political factors that leaves people in these destitute situations that you feel like is not spoken about enough, and or that you learned a lot about in your research?
A link that leaves people in desperate situations. My goodness, there's just so many of them. You know, I guess the immigration system is the first thing that, you know, it's not good to have people who don't have, you know, can't feel like full-fledged members of society. We welcome, you know, the United States welcomes their labor, and, you know, L.A. is able to stay, you know, fed and well scrubbed and prosperous because there is this, you know, tenacious source of labor. But then we don't give them any legal recognition. And I think that creates practical problems, but I also think it creates, I don't know, like psychological or emotional, there's some like discouragement there. It's like you're being reminded that you're a second-class citizen every single day. And I don't know. I'm not optimistic, though, about how to get past that. I think we've done much better in the criminal justice world. You know, we've sort of seen that light, and we've made some big changes, although maybe the pendulum is swinging back another way now, as people are more and more preoccupied about crime. But I don't know, the immigration system, there isn't an immigration system. You know, people are like, come the right way. There is no right way. It's just impossible.
There's also one other thing that's more fixable, and these are these what seemingly small fines, the debt that people rack up, that for a lot of people it's like, oh, that's a $200 fine or a $300 fine. Well, in several points of the book, this person who's a vendor doesn't have the money to pay the fine, so they do their time in jail for 13 days, leaving their kids behind. And that debt just grows and grows and grows. And those kind of penalties, those fines, are exactly the kind of thing that that could be changed, that a city government could really take a look at. So, you know, seemingly small things for us or for some people are huge, and that really comes out in the book.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like the criminalization of poverty.
Right.
And the way people are forced to finance like their own oppression.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
You know, if my car gets towed tomorrow and I don't have, you know, whatever, $1,000 cash to get it out of hock, I'll put that on a credit card. You know, but if you're on the fringes of, you know, the economy and you know, living in, you know, just desperate conditions, you don't have that opportunity. And so even, you know, even $150 ticket could become like a financial emergency.
All right, Jesse, thank you. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for being here. congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
Can we give one more hand to Jesse Katz? Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your close reading and also for keeping time very well. I appreciate that. But I love hearing two reporters talk to one another. And Jesse, thank you for writing this book and doing this work. And I think it's very important. And I'm really glad you were all here to hear about it and be a part of it. I'm usually a bit briefer at the end of our events, and I tell you where to go, where books are and stuff. But I do think it's relevant. We have a display near the front register of books for the Prisoners Literature Project. There are ongoing partners here in the Bay Area. The books that we have are highly requested titles from people who are incarcerated in California and also in other states. But they have been operating since the 80s. They're based in Berkeley, and they do exactly all of the seemingly ridiculous rules that prisons come up with for what books can and can't come in, that are sometimes practical and sometimes not. They keep up with all of those, and they are a vendor that can ship books directly to incarcerated people. So we have a display where if you buy a book off of there, we give it directly to the Prisoners Literature Project. They give it directly to someone who has requested that book. So feel free to take a look while you're up there and see what we have. It's an easy way to donate to an incarcerated reader, so keep that in mind. And now the other part, the logistical part. Jesse is going to be signing at the back desk right here, where the book is and where the sign is that says his name on it. You can find books at the front register and bring them back here to have them signed. If you have any other questions, let me know. If not, make yourself comfortable, take a look around. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.